make me a cambric shirt, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Without a seam or needlework, then you shall be a true lover of mine. Can you wash it in the well? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, where water ne'er ran nor rain never fell.
It's a little after 2, so I think we'll get started. Thank you for coming, and I want to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Wolastoqey people, who signed treaties of freedom and peace with the British Crown back in the late 1700s. So this is the last of our series this year, and we're really fortunate to have Heather Aiton with us. Heather came to her senses and came back to New Brunswick. She's from New Brunswick originally, but she's been around because she has a degree in public history, which is, I think, a fascinating degree to have, and then studied costume design at Dalhousie, after which she had a job at the National Historical Site up there on Citadel Hill, working with people and costuming. And then she went to Trent and got a job as an assistant archivist. And when she was going through photographs, she discovered that all she knew about costumes and historic costumes was really useful in trying to identify people in photographs. So this is how all this came to be. And we're really happy to have her. And afterwards, we're going to pump her brain because thank you to Lynn Adelman. We have a display set up over here of just a few items out of our collection of clothing, and a little description of how we try to find out more. In fact, thank you, Bernice Ripley, for offering to help us get in touch with Shirley Reed, because she was at the wedding where that lovely velvet blue dress was worn. So it's fun to try to dig. And if this sounds like an intriguing thing and you're not already a member, join us, because there's lots of fun things like this, something that goes on here. Anyway, thank you for coming today, Heather, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Anne. Let me get my water, which I forgot. I'll need this later. Thanks for the intro, Anne. You sound more impressive than I feel right now. I haven't been here for a very long time, so thanks very much. And thank you everyone for joining me this afternoon as I take you through the techniques that I use to date old photographs. Anne already mentioned why I gravitate to the clothes worn by people in the photographs in order to date them, so that's going to be my focus today. However, I try to cross-reference the clothes with other elements in the photographs as much as possible, because, well, for starters, people can't be counted on to dress predictably in any time period. And because I still find some periods in fashion history to be similar enough to perplex me completely. So a couple of disclaimers about my talk this afternoon. I've, as Anne said, I took a costume diploma in Halifax about 25 years ago now. I haven't done any real costuming in about 20 years. The exception would be a corset that I built for a steampunk themed wedding in 2018, and that's not quite the same thing. Therefore, in no way do I claim to be an authority on historical clothing, although I do have a clue. I'm just a bit out of practice when it comes to construction. I hope, however, that I can get back to it at some point in the not too distant future and relearn what I have forgotten. I actually have a treadle sewing machine that I like to use for historical costuming purposes. And you'd know, it belonged to Janet Aiton, who would be Frank's wife, Janet Millen. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. I discovered I'm a cousin with Nancy, so this is fun. Okay. So my second disclaimer, I've been back home in New Brunswick for less than 2 years. And although I've begun renovating this presentation to have more New Brunswick content, many photos and many of my anecdotes come from my time spent at Trent Valley Archives in Peterborough, Ontario. And that's where I spent 10 years of my career. However, the new photographs I've been adding from the archives at UNB, where I'm now working, have not as far as I know, seen the light of day for a very, very, very long time. And I'm pleased to be able to feature some of these in the presentation. I've been working at UNB on processing a large portion of the Ganong family papers. These papers are comprised of documents across 4 generations of the Ganong family, including correspondence, photo albums, a very small selection of early business records, and many personal papers of Joan Ganong, who would be chocolatier Win Ganong's younger sister. She passed the documents on to her nephew, Gordon, who donated them to the University of New Brunswick. I absolutely love this collection, and I could go on about it for quite a while, but then we'd never get to the point of why I'm here in the first place. So, slide 2. It works, yes. Okay, as I mentioned, I created the original version of this presentation as part of an online lecture series for the members of Trent Valley Archives. I've never done it in person before. This was during the pandemic, so this is a first for all, the first for me and first for you. And that's where I met your fellow member, Jillian Holden. Hi, if you're there, Jillian, online. Many members of Trent Valley Archives are genealogical researchers, I'm assuming like many of you. Often the folks I worked with there became interested in dating photographs because they inherited a mystery. They've inherited a drawer full or a box full or a trunk full of unnamed, undated family photographs that they are loath to toss out. That sounds familiar. Well, dating photographs can be one step towards identifying the people in them. Sometimes with these dates and at least a partial family tree, it's possible to figure out which faces may belong to which names. I hope that I'll be able to show you some general principles, as well as some resources that you can use to date photographs that you might run into in your various projects. Oops. No, can I go back? I can't go back. Uh-oh. Am I going back or forwards? That's back. Yeah. Oh, this one? Oh, technology is great when it works. Okay, that one. All right, unlike my current job at UNB, where I hide on the 5th floor processing archival material, my job at Trent Valley Archives was much more public facing. A bonus of this was that I often was the first person to see the surprises that arrived in the mail. A gorgeous collection of photos from a number of different Peterborough photographers arrived in that manner shortly after we had to close Trent Valley Archives in the early days of the pandemic. They were given to us by a member from Owen Sound, and we felt it worthwhile to put them in context by date. The archivist and I had a lot of fun assigning dates to them. And it's because he and I approached dating photographs from very different but complementary directions that gave us the idea for this presentation. This time, there. So I'm going to focus on costume as my primary method of dating photographs. I'm going to speak about assigning dates to the costume worn by subjects of a photograph based on the overall silhouette presented by their clothing in a given time period. Sometimes specific items of costume can offer quite specific dates, but usually that they range a little more broad than that. Also, variables like age, social class, country of origin, and the circumstances in which a photo was taken can make dating a photograph by clothing alone a little more confusing. So it's important, very important, to cross-reference the clothes with other things that appear in the photographs to get a more accurate date. In studio portraits, and sometimes in other situations, we're often lucky enough to know the identity of a photographer through a maker's mark. And if we're really lucky, this mark will indicate an address of a photographer, and these can also give us clues to dates. Other incidentals like landscape, buildings, cars, and random items can be beneficial. I've chosen to focus on Western European style clothing because that is the extent of my area of expertise, and I will end my costume overview at about 1920 because photos before that date seem to be the most perplexing to the people I worked with because the clothes are in them are beyond living memory. All right, first, silhouette. What do I mean by that? I mean the overall outline created by the clothing. Here you can see the drastic change in silhouette from the 1860s to the 1920s. It's more obvious in women's clothing than in men's clothing during the last few centuries, although this wasn't always the case. Since we're talking about dating photographs and not paintings, I'm going to start with a silhouette that was popular at the time when photographs first became popular. The dresses in particular that date from the Civil War period in the US or in Canada during the years just before and after Confederation are among the most distinctive and, I think, easy to identify. Menswear at this time is a little easier to pinpoint as well. I should mention that while I use date ranges to divvy up these sections, there can be outliers on either end of the spectrum. Real trendsetters, like the man over here in the peacoat on the left. Is that left? Yes. Or folks who hung on to older styles for whatever reason. But it's not common to find them lingering too long into the next era. Also, to follow current fashion trends was not only the purview of the wealthy. All but the most marginalized people had at least some access to fashionable items at this point, due to the dropping cost of fabric and clothing because of industrialization. Mass production of sewing machines began in the 1850s. They were advertised for home use in newspapers by the 1860s. This, as well as the invention of synthetic dyes, meant that clothing could be made more quickly and cheaply, both in factories and at home. Fashion magazines allowed the masses, even in North America, to participate in evolving trends of high fashion in Europe. By the early 1900s, clothing was increasingly made in factories and sold in department stores. Here we have three women from the Rogers family, a Peterborough family of some renown and some means. If any of you have ever been to Peterborough, one R.B. Rogers, who I'm already losing it. R.B. Rogers was the engineer that built the tallest hydraulic lift lock in the world. And that's at Peterborough. So that's the family. That explains a bit about this photo. Date was not provided for this photo, but based on the dresses, I'd put it in the middle 1860s. You can see here that each woman is wearing a bodice. That's a jacket-like item that takes the place of a blouse or skirt. And it's tightly fitted from the shoulders right down to, excuse me, shoulders to the waist, and that the skirt flares out to a bell-like shape. Just think Gone with the Wind. Later during the 1860s, as the fashion started to shift forward towards the bustle period, the skirts started to become flatter at the front and fuller at the back. Also during this period, you do see poofy sleeved shirts in various colors. They're called Garibaldi shirts. A dropped sleeve is fashionable, and with the shoulder seam stitched to just about here, actually, well below the natural shoulder line. Hair is generally worn smooth, parted at the center, and pulled back, sometimes with ringlets or looped braids at the sides or back. Daytime necklines are high, while evening necklines are low. And these are some of the underpinnings that go into making this bell-shaped silhouette. I didn't put a rating on this presentation. Maybe I should have. The crinoline was actually considered a healthier alternative to wearing layers of petticoats to fill out the skirt. This could get rather warm and heavy, even though the crinoline, while cumbersome in its own way, was actually a lighter alternative. Losing the mouse here. There we go. And now the men. I find menswear more difficult to date. But of the time periods that, since the advent of photography, I find the 1860s to be the most distinctive, especially the hair. This is the era of longish waves on top, as well as those mutton chop sideburns. When mustaches or beards are worn, they're generally very long, like that of the gentleman pictured on, is he on your right? Yes, okay, good. I don't want to get all that confused. The alternative style was that most famously worn by Abraham Lincoln, relatively short on top with closely clipped sideburns that extended to meet a beard with no mustache. Other defining features of this period include waistcoats that were cut straight across at the bottom. These were usually a different color and pattern from the jacket and trousers. Often enough, all three pieces of what we now call a suit were entirely different colors. Sounds like fun to me. I think they're bringing it back. Suits cut of the same cloth became more common during the 1870s. The gentleman on the left is more formally attired. Now, because he's seated, it's hard to tell what sort of coat he's wearing, but since the rest of his attire is formal, it could be a tailcoat. A sack jacket or a lounge jacket was worn less formally and would have shorter lapels. Necklines are wide and could be tied in a bow or loosely knotted and fastened with a stick pin. And I'm just gonna say over here, you see one of the not before seen photos from the Ganon Connect collection. Not sure who that is, a relative of Whidden's mother's sister. It gets complicated, but there we are. We'll figure it out eventually. Right. Yes. By the time we reach 1870, the silhouette for both women and men is starting to narrow a bit. The fullness of the crinoline is heading towards the back of the dress, and we begin to see bustles. Men's bushy beards and sideburns are more closely clipped. We start to see something approximating the modern necktie, which is neatly knotted, with the ends fastened with a decorative stud. Yeah, I absolutely love the hair on this lady. I mean, look at this. I mean, she must have so much false hair hidden under there, or I don't know what she has hidden under there, but anyway, love it. Okay. If you're lucky enough to have a woman pictured in side view in your photo, you can get a pretty concise date range. The bustle went through three very distinct phases from about 1870 through 1890. From 1870 to about 1878, the trend was for a soft, full bustle. That's over here. That was created sometimes just by draping the skirts, you know, in a soft sort of drapey way. These skirts often have trains as well. From about 1878 to 1884, the bustle dropped to below the hips, and the fullness was emphasized at a lower place on the skirt. The bustle between 1884 and 1890 rose to about the same height as during the first bustle phase, except that this time it was much more rigid and shelf-like. You can sort of see it back here. It sticks almost out, almost horizontally. I'll bet you could balance a tea tray on some of these. Someone's probably tried. So the shape of the bustle, if you have a photo in which it's on full display, can be a dead giveaway. Unfortunately for aspiring photo daters, it also becomes fairly common during the 1870s for the subject of a photo to be seated, obscuring the bustle entirely. And so we have to rely on other means of dating these photos. Fortunately, there are other indicators. Ooh, what happened there? Okay. Well, my slide's a little messy, but you'll get the drift. This looks like a phase 3 bustle to me, although not a particularly rigid one. It's other factors in the photo which make me pretty sure it's closer to 1890 than 1870. One indicator is that the skirt is not touching the floor. See, there's a bit of a gap down here. Okay. Third phase bustle skirts often rose this much off the floor and even higher, but not too much higher. Can't have that. Generally, what distinguishes the period between 1870 to 1890 from the previous period is that the hair, although still parted at the center, appears softer. It's often waved around the face and piled at the back of the head. False hair is also a popular addition. Necklines can be open, square, or V-shaped, especially in the 1870s, but they tend to be higher, even boned, during the 1880s. The shoulder seam is no longer dropped during this period. And you can, well, maybe you can't see it in this small photo, but you can almost see that it's actually back up at the normal shoulder line here. And the sleeves fit very closely to the arm. Often you'll see a 3/4 length sleeve. Gloves are common, and usually the bodice and skirt are the same fabric. This woman has the high neckline of the 1880s, but if I jump back to slide 10 for a point of comparison, and if I can do it without completely shifting everything in the presentation. I jump back too far? This could be a lot of fun. Uh-oh. Okay, hold on. I'm going farther. You're seeing everything. Okay, I'm going to go through it really fast, and then I'm going to go back to where I was. And, oh, you're getting spoilers for everything. I'll talk about that later, maybe. Oh my goodness, a few of my other slides got a little bit messed up. Okay. It's fine. Yeah, all right. So I'm going to have to, I can do this. Hold on. I will share my screen again, and we'll start here. Come on, you can do it. I use my the arrow keys sometimes, but not today. All right, okay, there's slide 10. I'll do it this way just for a second so I can go back to where I was without having to go through the whole presentation. Okay, slide 10, revisited. Okay, we'll take a look at the other two women. Even though the bustles of two of the women on this page, this one and this one, aren't visible, you can see that the fullness of the skirt is near the top. Also, the hairstyles are not only piled on top of the head, they're elaborate and tall. Yeah, especially that one. The woman on the left, oh, you probably can't see it, but she's got a trailing ringlet right here. You can sort of see it on the side of her neck. And that was a very popular style during the 1870s. The woman on the right has a V neckline, which is also an indicator that this photo dates from the 1870s. And now we're going to jump back to slide 13. 13? Yes, 13. And go back to the slideshow. Look at us using technology. This is no. Okay, fine, we'll get there. Here's a review. There's a test at the end. Test at the end. Corsets, yes, okay. You're looking at me like you're nervous or something. You okay? Okay, it's gonna be fine. Well, we intended this as a learning experience. We're making this all work. Yeah, okay. Yes, just in case you're curious as to what held those skirts up, here are some very uncomfortable looking drawings of variations on those contraptions. All right. Here we go. Okay, the men. I already mentioned that facial hair is more closely trimmed during this period. James Harvey Ganong over here has a much more trim beard than his, well, I guess predecessor there with the bushiness on, I don't know what page that was, but anyway. Okay. And the neckties, yes, the neckties look a little more familiar to us than those of an earlier period. There are many different coat styles during this period, and many of the styles linger for a very long time. However, lounge or sack coats are becoming popular all the time, more popular all the time, and many styles curve at the bottom, like this one. Right. Oh, there you are. This one here. Okay. Yes, shirt collars can also be an indicator, and the closer we get to 1890, the taller the collar. This one's quite high. I would think that would be really uncomfortable personally, but wasn't me. So so that means it's likely to be later in the period. So probably a little closer to 1890. I know this one has to date from before 1888 because that's when James Harvey Ganong, that's when he passed away. So, all right, decorative waistcoats. They're still worn, but they all but disappear during this period. I mean, they're wearing them, but you can't see them because the neckline of the coat is so high. And when the coat's worn open, the waistcoat tends to be the same color as the coat. The tuxedo also makes its debut in the 1880s. All right. And now, slide 15, is that what this is? Well, we'll start talking and find out. Okay, 1890 to 1900, yes. A shorter time frame, because fashion, especially for women, starts to change very quickly from here on. Also, I've included a photo that gave me some trouble. This one drove me nuts for quite some time. Can you see me wiggling the mouse there? Oh, good. Okay, I'm not just I'm not sounding too crazy. Great. Okay. Yes, I had originally placed him in the 1880s, but something about his collar was making me suspicious. I now think it's more likely to have been taken during the 1890s, since this photo studio, Fowler and Oliver, which is way out there in Lindsay, Ontario, didn't open until 1887. Also, I just get such a kick out of this photo because look at his pant legs. Like, what was he doing that day before he walked in to have his photo taken? They've been rolled up, spattered with mud. Goodness, I wonder. He must have been having quite the day. Okay, here we see the sleeves that Anne of Green Gables envied. Those massive puffs were all the rage during the middle years of the 1890s, and in the 1980s miniseries, that's when Anne was depicted as a child. Actually, there seems to be a funny trend in fashion history that the widest styles dominate the middle of a decade, or often the middle of a century, actually. Definitely the middle of a decade. It's certainly true in women's blouses or shirtwaists during the 1890s, but also in the skirts of the 1860s. That's the middle of the decade. They get biggest, more bell-like. The bell bottoms of the 1970s and the shoulder pads of the 1980s. 1985, I don't know how you got through a door. Well, I do because I wore them. Anyway, not sure why, but it's a helpful dating tip for most periods. The skirt's the 1950s too, actually, was the whole poodle thing and the Christian Dior sort of shape. The silhouette of this period is the hourglass, and the corset provided the shape. Collars were high and often boned. The bustle hung around during this period, but it was much reduced, often consisting only of gathered fullness at the back of the skirt. Often, women are seen wearing a tailored jacket, a blouse, and a gored skirt of a fabric that matched the jacket. Two-piece dresses are also popular, and these are typically highly decorative with gobs and gobs of lace and rows of pin tucks. There are some pretty wild experiments with sleeves, from the massive puffs mid-decade to teeny shoulder, little tiny puffs in the later part of the period, and the leg of mutton sleeve, which seems to have been a popular sleeve throughout the period. These were mostly popular on shirtwaists, front buttoning the front buttoning predecessor of the modern blouse. Hair is typically worn in curls around the face and twisted into a coil on top. Here's another photo of those sleeves. Everybody's wearing them. Now, this is one of the never before seen photos from the Ganong family papers. Written on the back of the photo are the words, "Grub Afterward Club, Beavis, Gold, Corin, Todd, Vose, Whidden, Rounds, and Livingston." So those must be the last names of the ladies in the photo. As you can see, this photo has been through it and requires some conservation work. The photographer was W.H. Edwards in St. Stephen, which indicates to me that this Grub Afterwards Club was an international club, since Burla Whidden, and she's here, this is Burla, later Ganong, so she married Whidden Ganong's father. This is Whidden Ganong's mother, yes, Burla. She was living in Calais, Maine during the 1890s, so this was a very international club, I imagine. Yes. Going to look at this photo again, because I'm sure it's 1893, and that's because it's written on the photo. I love it when they do that. Write the date on your photos on the back. Briefly, not an awful lot has changed in men's clothing. These two are clean shaven, which was common, although neat mustaches are often seen during this period as well. Collars can reach 3 inches high during the 1890s, and sometimes they have points like these. Like these right here. Hold on. Right here. Is anybody else thinking of Don Cherry and his collars? My goodness. All right. Coats button lower and are often worn open to show the waistcoats. So we go back to seeing contrasting or decorative ones, as the seated gentleman is wearing, but not always, as we can see with the man standing. Lounge or sack coats continue to be popular, and they could be cut straight or curved in front. Hair is short, parted at the side, or sometimes in the center. We have one of each style here. Top hats are still worn for formal occasions, and also the derby hat becomes popular. There. This is my favorite dress in any of the photos I saw there at Trent Valley Archives. I want to apologize for my photo credits. They seem to have gone sideways. Not too sure why, but I don't know. Technology is great when it works. Okay. Styles from 1900 to 1920 are changing as fast as the technology, and after the First World War, fashion begins to change at breakneck speed. This particular silhouette for women's dress is very short-lived. It features high standing collars, often held up with boning. Hats were large and decorative. Hairstyles are large and poofy, arranged in what was called a pompadour. Bodices and blouses were pouched in the front. In fact, the whole silhouette is rather droopy. The bustle is gone, and there are a variety of decorative skirts, but the fullness of everything moves downward and back. Well, except in the front of the blouse, of course. You can see this style very well in the same Anne of Green Gables series as she and her friends grow up a bit. And I say to go back to slide 19 here. Do I want to? No, I don't. I'll show you later, maybe. There was. Oh, it worked. Oh, good. Okay, I can use that button. Great. So this one here, right here, you can see this is very, very droopy in the front. She's actually added some floofiness to the front of her bodice, and you can almost see it here. But there's a slide later that'll show you better the way that her back is curved. Okay, so that's the poofiness. Right. Okay, slide 20 again. The silhouette of this period is called the S curve, and it looks like this partly because of the pouchy blouses and also because of history's worst corset. This one. It's awful. Okay. The years 1900 to about 1908. I don't know what happened there, but here we go. All right, 1908. Win the award for history's worst corset. And it's no surprise to me that the corset begins to disappear after this point. In the catalogs, it's called the straight front corset. Just look at this thing. I mean, it's got a tiny little waist, and then the front, oh, the front is straight. You can sort of see how that it got the name, but then her back is like arched at an uncomfortable angle. This lady is not comfortable at all. Yeah, and you can see it, especially here. I mean, see how her hips are thrust right backwards? Ouch. I have to say, however, that not all corsets are uncomfortable torture devices. And a properly fitted one that isn't cinched to the extreme was often lauded as helpful and offered good back support. Having made and worn them myself on occasion for reenacting purposes, I can attest to this, especially as back support. I found that lugging heavy buckets of water at a living history museum is a lot more comfortable when you're wearing a corset. I don't know. It works pretty well. Okay. There we go. Of course it's gone, or at least it's disappearing. Later corsets began to support a more natural shape before they disappeared altogether, not all at once, but rather fading away. Here we have the silhouette familiar to us in movies like Titanic. Throughout this period, high collars gave way to lower ones. Sleeves could be seen in multiple lengths, even as short as the elbow, and ankles begin to appear under skirts everywhere. Asymmetrical decoration became popular, and it also became simpler. Skirts straightened, and at their worst, around 1914, became so narrow that women wore them, the women who wore them, and not everybody did because they were really, really impractical and restricting, they would hobble around when they walked because the bottom of the skirt, the hemline, was so narrow. They called them hobble skirts. It was also more common for clothes to close in the front instead of the back, sign of women's growing independence. They no longer needed much help from others to get dressed. Most noticeably, hemlines were on the rise permanently until the 1960s when they couldn't get any higher, so they had to come down, and they've been all over the place ever since. Okay. The changes in menswear are more subtle, but still evident. The collars are still high, but can have more rounded appearance. Maybe you can probably see this guy over here. It almost looks like it's a curve instead of a point on the collar. Okay. Shirts are still white, but color is starting to creep in. You can find a blue shirt with a detachable white collar, for example. Ties are tied pretty much the way they are today. Sack coats are now the standard suit jacket. That's what they became. The main change being that they button higher in this period than the last period.
By sack coat, do you mean the one on the right that's straighter than?
I mean, they both actually are
both.
very sack coat like. This one's just open. They're basically a modern suit jacket. That's
Okay.
That's when this sort of, you can actually call that a suit jacket by this time, really, in the modern sense. So generally the look's becoming a little more relaxed, and items of clothing that used to be everyday wear 100 years earlier, like the top hat, live on as evening wear. Waistcoats are still worn, but are seen less and less as leisure wear. The odd pullover sweater can be seen in snapshots and less formal settings. The pocket watch, which was so standard a piece for such a long time that I didn't even mention it in this presentation, was being replaced by the wristwatch after World War I. And the hair didn't change an awful lot, but rather less of it's appearing on the face. Okay. As much as I'd love to go through from the 20s to the present, I have to stop sometime. I'd still like to address children's clothing for a moment because they're often photographed. Throughout the periods I've spoken about, both boys and girls wore dresses in their earliest years. Breeching, the time when boys stopped wearing dresses and began wearing trousers or knickers, varied somewhat, could be anywhere between the ages of 3 and 7. After this, children tend to dress like miniature adults. Variations on the sailor suit can sometimes be seen on both boys and girls as early as the 1870s. And we sometimes see a boy dressed in a little Lord Fauntleroy suit, which I have way back on slide 3. No, I'm not going there. It was a fad in formal dress for American middle-class children. It consisted of a velvety cutaway jacket and matching knee-length pants worn with a dressy blouse that had a large lace or ruffled collar on it. Probably know what I'm talking about. They appeared around 1885. Girls' dresses are shorter than women's, and their hemlines didn't drop to women's length until they were about age 15. In the 1890s, simpler dresses with pleated skirts and sailor blouses, or dresses with full skirts gathered onto yoked bodices, showed a trend towards more practical clothing for girls. And here we have another photo from the Ganong papers. And over here is Whitten. Isn't he cute? I knew him as a lovely old man from the chocolate ads in the 1980s. Anyway, he's there on the left next to his sister Carmen and his brother Philip. And this photo dates from about 1914, give or take a year, I think. And I spelled Whitten wrong. Oh, my dear. If I hadn't pointed that out, maybe you wouldn't have noticed. I shouldn't do that. Okay. Clothes worn by senior members of society can present a bit of a conundrum as well at times. Some folks, like Princess Leia here on the left, are photographed wearing clothing fairly typical of a period while sporting a hairstyle they likely wore in their youth. This double bun style, now known as space buns, which it wasn't then, of course, had been worn at various times in history, dating back to the Middle Ages, really. But during the 1910s, hairstyles tended to frame the face more softly, and this severe center part is more reminiscent of the 1860s. Although I couldn't find space buns in the 1860s, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. And then I thought last night, because I'm rethinking all my life choices last night, that it's possible she's wearing an older dress and she's actually wearing a hairstyle from the 1920s, because it actually came back in the 1920s to have those little buns on the side, a little lower than those normally, but I don't know, she can do what she wants. So others, yeah, some people hold on to an older style of clothing like great grandma here on the right, far right. This photo dates from 1892, and I'm sure of that because it's written on the back. Mom is standing in the back, and she has a very fashionable dress. Grandma here sports the little shoulder puffs that were popular about that time. And great grandma held on to an earlier, fairly straight hairstyle and is wearing a less stylish but still very serviceable dress from a few years earlier. And then there's military dress, a very special niche unto itself. Many niches, in fact, with historical reenactors specializing in different periods. Although I have a general idea of what cut of uniform belongs in what time period, I generally pass photos like these on to folks who know more than I do. A photo of someone in military dress can tell you not only the time frame in which they served, but depending on the photo's clarity, things like rank and regiment, and sometimes even more. There are lots and lots of books and websites that can help you identify badges and insignia, as well as plenty of hobbyists who can cut your research time in half. By the way, the photograph in the middle dates from the Boer War. Some folks can see this right away. I did not. But I would have mistaken it for First War, actually, if it wasn't for this lady at the back, who is wearing a very poofy, pouchy looking blouse and bishop sleeves, which was, in that fashion range of the S-curve horrible corset from, 1901, 1902 in here somewhere. And yes, if there's any military aficionados out there, the negative was reversed. Insignia should be somewhere else. Anyway. Okay, I mentioned Anne of Green Gables and Titanic earlier with reference to a couple of time periods. I've made a list of decent costume films for the time periods we've seen here, and one that we haven't. There may be better period pieces out there. I've hardly seen them all, but these are those I think of when I'm trying to pin down a time period. I have the most trouble with the years 1870 to 1890, and I had trouble coming up with a good costume flick to help me out. I'm open to suggestions. The Man Who Would Be King is pretty good on menswear, but we don't see too much Western women's wear in that film. And with nearly all period movies made in the 1970s, and to an extent the 1980s, I find you need to suspend your sense of reality a little and ignore the makeup, completely ignore the makeup, and often the hairstyles too. Speaking of Western women, you'll notice that every photograph I've used shows people of Western European descent. The photos I've used came either from the Ganong photos at UNB or the collections at Trent Valley Archives. And that means, that seems to be that what they have before 1920, unless I'm missing something, which is possible. But this highlights a problem that is common in Canadian archives. In Peterborough, for example, the Irish and British seem to have garnered the most attention. Other historical immigrant groups there to that area have been chronically under or misrepresented, including the Chinese and the French. And of course, the Anishinaabe are all but invisible in Trent Valley Archives records as well. And when they are visible, it's through very Eurocentric eyes. Rectifying this retroactively is going to be difficult. At the very least, I hope we can do better going forward. Okay. Photographers. We can't date by costume alone. In the case of studio photographs, there's much that can be learned about the date if we know the identity of the photographer. Now, Peterborough has lots of photographers through its history, and here's a sample of some of their marks. Others have done a fair bit of work identifying and researching them, which made my job in Peterborough much easier. Most of these will be completely irrelevant to everyone here. But I would like to point out one P.H. Green. He was born, you can see his mark down here. He was born in, what did I say? He was born in Waterloo, Ontario, but appears on the census as a photographer in Guelph in 1881. He shows up in Peterborough in the mid-1880s and worked there until 1896 when he moved to Cobourg, Ontario, before setting shop up in St. John, New Brunswick, where he appears by 1901. He eventually moved to British Columbia, where he died in 1925. And his older brother, John Walker Green, was also a photographer in Peterborough, and he stayed for an awfully long time. I just say all that to say that the world is really small. This list was put together by a member of Trent Valley Archives of different photographers in Peterborough and the surrounding area over time. And I used to refer to it a lot. Now, maybe you know already, but I'm just learning this stuff. There is a list of New Brunswick photographers that is being continuously compiled by Josh Green, the photo archivist at the Provincial Archives of New Brunswick. And he told me that you could contact him and ask him anything. Yeah, he did tell me that. But he is compiling a really, really good list. It's actually more informative than this one. It's got little biographies of lots of photographers across New Brunswick and date ranges. He added the Peterborough stuff about P.H. Green, which thrilled me to no end. Anyway, so these are also from Peterborough, but I'll show you anyway, because styles of marks can be similar through time. They can either be on the back or the front of a photograph. The earliest ones were small, often simple. The Smith mark, right, I'm pointing right here. Yeah, this is Smith. Seems to date from the late 1860s. As time went on, they became larger and more elaborate. The Estabrook mark, where's that one here? Yeah, it's like Estabrook, but spelled with an R. That always made me suspicious. It dates from the 1870s, because I know there were lots of Estabrooks in the Woodstock area for a while. I'm getting off track. The Estabrook mark dates from the 1870s. By the 1880s, you start to see a variety of colors being used. The Little mark, this is James Little here. He dates, it's in gold ink, well, gold-ish ink, and it dates from the 1880s probably. Whitten down here in the corner is embossed in gold ink, and it dates from about 1900. Some of them, like green over here, different green, no relation, include a street address, and they can be looked up in city directories, and that really helps you pinpoint a photo date. Also, many photographers change their marks through time, which can be useful in dating them if they have been working in the area over a long period of time. Like this guy, George B. Sproul, another Peterborough photographer from the mid-1860s to late 1890s. His mark changed a number of times, and he used more marks than the ones I show here. But when I compare different photos with the same marks, they seem relatively consistent with a particular period according to the clothes. I have learned, however, that some photographers use multiple marks at the same time, so a concise timeline may not be possible. But this is also a good place to show how backdrops evolve as time goes on. During the early 1860s, most backgrounds were plain. You might see a column or a velvet drape, but furnishings are generally minimal. So over here, she's just got basically curtains and I don't know, there's something over here, but I'm not sure what it is. By the 1870s, the backcloths begin to show outdoor scenes as well. Items like fences and padded furniture were brought into the studio. During the 1880s, both the backcloths and the props became even more elaborate. You could see tree stumps, rocks, plants, and even more furniture. By the 1890s, the backcloth is less backcloth, getting tongue-tied here, is less important than the props. The lady on the right stands in a setting created to look like it could be in a room in the home. After 1900, backdrops tended to have plain, they were more plain and minimal, and they used minimal furniture. Okay. All right. This photo for me was a lesson in humility, and particularly in how the photographer's mark can be useful in dating photographs. Just 3 days before the first time I gave this presentation, I was still looking for a good photo of the early bustle period, and I thought this might do. I mean, you can almost see it. It just looks like a soft little kind of bustle. The lady's hair is dressed in a way that looks, at least from the front, to be a bit of a throwback to the 1860s, but her dress features the drapery that one would expect of an 1870s bustle dress. The gentleman's coat buttons high, and I was about to put this photo on the bustle page when I looked at the child's dress. And that, I mean, okay, I'll admit that when I look at children's dresses, I never really used to pay much attention to them because they're often white and they look what I wore, like what I wore in the 1970s. So I just thought they just didn't change. But this time I noticed that the fullness of the skirt is all at the bottom, and you can almost see that it's a dropped waist here. So that confused me a little. And I turned to that list of photographers I showed you a minute ago, and I found out that W. McFadden didn't operate a studio in Peterborough to the 1880s. So I did a little more research into children's clothes and found out how popular that dropped waist was. So regardless of mom's hair, the photo can't date from before 1880. So there you go. That's my lesson in using multiple dating methods whenever possible. Okay. Oh, another way to cross-check the date of a photo is by what else is going on. Sometimes furniture and machinery can give clues. Automobiles are much more common, however, but if I need to identify one of these in a photograph, I usually phone my dad. He likes to volunteer for me long distance whenever he can. I've already mentioned props and backgrounds in studio portraits, and other items like newspapers, diplomas, posters, and signage can be useful as well. We really lucked out with this particular photo. I'd love to tell you that I identified it by the gentleman's suit, but I did not. The calendar on the wall tells us that it's August 1898. Assuming this man kept up with his calendar changes anyway. Okay, the story behind, are we okay for time? Okay, I'll do it. The story behind this photograph is a little more complicated, and it was a group effort, but we were able to pinpoint the exact day this shot was taken. A number of years ago, now this is a Peterborough photo again, Trent Valley Archives received a substantial number of home movies, and one showed a military parade through downtown Peterborough. This is a still from that film. These are definitely men in uniform, specifically summer dress, and so at the very least, the date would have to be June, July, or August between about 1940 and 1945. But an astute volunteer noticed the marquee at the Regent Theatre reads, if you can barely see it, but you can sort of make it out, today, John Wayne, The Long Voyage Home. That film was released on October 9th, 1940, according to Google, which you use a lot for research these days. So we figured this film was shot during the summer of 1941. I asked a local military historian why there'd be a military parade in Peterborough during the summer of 1941, and he suggested Warriors' Day. Well, that's plausible, we thought. Shortly after that, a local film historian contacted us and let us know that The Long Voyage Home actually played in Peterborough in June 1941, not August, as he found during his film history research project using the Peterborough Examiner. We located the article, and it confirmed a Victory Loan rally was scheduled to take place in Riverside Park on Sunday, June 9th, 1941. So we could get an exact date on that particular photo. Okay, I do know how to spell contradicted. The D should be over here. Okay, this is a story I haven't told online before. If my former boss is watching, I hope he's okay with it. All right. So one last example of dating a photograph using costume. In this case, the process of assigning a date to this photo did not start with the clothes because I wasn't trying to date it. the archivist at Trent Valley Archives, Elwood Jones, lovely man, and he's very good at dating photos. But as I told you, I think at the beginning, we approach things very differently. And sometimes we would butt heads. We get on well, but we butt heads. So in this Peterborough streetscape, he meticulously scoured the city directories to pinpoint dates of every business for which he could find signage in this photograph. And there's quite a few. I mean, there's the Bank of Toronto here. There's Haynes Photography over here. Can't remember. I can't see what this is right now. It's too small. But anyway, lots of different signs. So he was, I mean, it's a great way to look for photograph dates, is to cross-reference with directories as you've got signage in the photo. So he came up with a date of about, 1905, 1908. I looked at the photo really closely, and I looked at him and I said, Elwood, that's an awful lot of ankle for 1908. Now I get it. After all that work, no one wants to be proved wrong. So he said to me, well, maybe they're ladies of the night. In the end, we went back to the directories, and after a little more haggling, decided that a date of 1917 fit all our parameters. So we cross-checked, we checked again all the street signs and found a few more, and found that these businesses were all there in 1917 as well. So it fit. It worked for all of us. But that was a day I'll never forget. So here we are with the photo I started with. Now, this is a photograph of a Murphy family, and there are many Murphy families in Peterborough and in lots of other places. Some names are included on the back of this photo. There's Mr. Murphy. Well, that's helpful. Mrs. Murphy, Clara Murphy, and M.E. Murphy. Now, with that much information and the fact that this photo was produced in the area, I visited Ancestry.com to look for a Murphy family in the Peterborough area who had 2 daughters under 15, one substantially under 15, more like under 6, in the mid 1890s, because sleeves, right? Sleeves. And in order to identify the parents and to find out what ME means. You know what? I never found them. It's still a mystery. Maybe they're a visiting family in the area. They're one of a few works in progress, but I haven't lost hope that one day someone will identify them. I hope that today you've learned something here that can help you to solve some of your own family photo mysteries as well. But just to make sure that you do, I've included some of the sources I consulted in making the slideshow. And that's what I've got. So I guess I'll open the floor to questions if you have any, and hopefully I'll be able to say something reasonably sensible.
What are we gonna do when photoshopping is? I don't know if everybody looked at our poster carefully, but I've been saying, oh, I know when that poster or that photo must have been done. But in order to make the poster, my son photoshopped the guy on far left wearing a High Heart New York shirt. So, but you look at the tops, but see the I Heart New York shirt that got photoshopped. Oh. So this is really, so now we're into a new problem.
But at the very least, you can guess the date was, the photo was altered in approximately 2020. Well, actually, Photoshop was at 2003.
Yeah.
Any idea when 10 pictures were taken? Like,
Sorry?
popular 10 pictures?
Oh, that was, you do see, actually, okay, that's a long time period. You see them most often very early, like, oh my goodness, what is the start date for those? Again, that's not quite my area of expertise. Little 1860-ish, I'm gonna guess, just because of that's when photography started. But they're popular then, but you actually see them lingering for longer than I would have expected. Like I've seen them up until the 1930s, which seems really late, but maybe it was just sort of a novelty thing. I don't know, but they weren't very common, of course, by the 1930s. But
And did photographers do traveling?
Yes.
Is that
there were certainly traveling photographers. Who's the famous Civil War photographer who was a traveling photographer? It's escaping me. Somebody here might know. The Civil War photographer. Oh, it'll come to me when I'm not thinking of it. Oh, you are okay.
I'll think someone.
Photographers in Nova Scotia. Yeah,
Anyway, that's fine.
that's okay. Provincial Archives in Nova Scotia might be helpful. Yes.
Have you gone and looked into the Harvey Studios photos? I don't know how many they keep. Or if it's any record, or does anyone else know about Harvey Studios?
They keep a lot of records. Yeah, every once in a while they put up a display of historical photographs. Is that why you were asking?
Well, I'm just wondering, you know, do they have a loan, or have they given some to the archives, or I don't know anything about it. Yeah.
Harvey Studio, I mean, like I say, I'm at UND and I'm new here, so I'm just learning all this stuff. I understand that at least some of their stuff has gone to the provincial archives. I don't know like if they keep all of it or if they have a selection process, like some archives have to do a selection, just because of space constraints. But I know somebody who might know the answer to that question. She happens to be my sister, who's the archivist of the provincial archives, so.
There's also an earlier whiting studio, photography studio or photographer.
Yeah,
And then they ended up moving to Virginia,
okay,
but you'll see it on some pictures around here, whiting.
okay. Whiting, now that sounds familiar to me. What, hold on. We'll keep talking. I thought I had a whiting photo in here. No, it wasn't a whiting photo. It was I think the person in the photo was a whiting. It was from that military one. Yes, a lot of, well, as you see from PH Green, I mean, he started in, what did I say, Waterloo, and he ended up out west somewhere. So I mean, photographers travel a lot. Sometimes a photography collection will end up at an archive, and a lot of times if that can happen. Other times it just, I mean, disappears. I mean, if someone buys it. Okay, when the Roy Studios is a very big name photographer in Peterborough. And that family was there doing photography for, oh goodness, must have been close on 80 years. Anybody in Peterborough watching this? Anyway, no, okay.
Jillian didn't show up.
Jillian didn't show up.
We're recording, so she'll see it.
Oh, great. Okay, hi, Jillian. Anyway, Roy was in the same town for a really long time. And so when they finally sold their studio, and I don't remember the date, but it was within living memory, the collection was just there. It was left in the studio building itself. And so then the Peterborough Archives ended up acquiring the collection through a series of deals and things. So yes, that's a case where the photo collection is pretty well intact and in one location, but it doesn't always happen. I mean, if a photography studio was short-lived or if it passed between various hands, who knows? We're really fortunate to have the collections that we have still in existence. So that's not really an answer to the question, but that's the sort of trajectory of things that can happen. I know that Studio East in Woodstock was in Woodstock, New Brunswick, through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. They've recently donated their studio collection to the provincial archives. I don't know if it's available publicly yet, but it's there. So yes.
So I just Googled the article that I have been seeing on the CT website in February 2020. And the title is Frederickson Photography Studio Purchase Old Negatives. And it's a story about Harvey Studio.
Okay.
Having a new owner, and they're going through all their photographs, and says at the end, if you want to photograph the full mosaic, just contact them.
Contact Harvey Studio?
Harvey Studio, but this is from 2020. Well, they're still there. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, try Harvey Studio, and if you don't get an answer there, complain to my sister.
But
There.
I remember reading that article.
Okay.
That they had made it public.
Yeah. So I mean, they're definitely being saved somewhere.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be too hard to track down.
Yeah, and I just Googled Frederickson whole photos with that article.
Google's amazing.
I noticed back at the earlier ones, so the men's pants were very tight, like straight up and down. But then as you went on, then they started to flare out. And you could tell that they weren't this.
Yeah, they weren't really that stovepipe leg thing. I mean, yeah, that's just a case of men's fashion changing ever so slightly. You know, over over time periods. Yeah, I mean, men's fashion, I find it tough because it doesn't change nearly as much. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that there was variation in the legs. Yes.
Was it typical for a family to have a portrait or photos done? Was it something very expensive? And did they have an occasion, or was it done to mark a celebration, a life milestone?
You know what? I actually don't know the answer to that question. Like, because costumes more my thing than the actual study of photography. So I bet Josh Green could tell you.
I think it was quite expensive, it was probably a dollar.
Mm,
What was your wages per day?
and that would depend on the job. Yeah. I mean, you do see people wearing generally, except that man with the terrible cuffs in that photo, the one with the muddy legs. You do see them generally dressed in probably their best clothes, so you would think it would be for a special occasion. I can just hear him. I can hear him now on some like wooden plank roads there in Lindsay, Ontario, stepping in a mud puddle and they're just going, oh, darn it. Yeah, getting his photo taken. Yes.
I think you're quite correct there. I think the number of pictures that would have been taken in those days would depend on how wealthy the family was.
Makes sense.
And if there's only one, yeah, and if they live. About 10 years ago, my wife Sheila and I had an interesting experience with
Mhm.
this. Her family came from Montreal. Her grandmother grew up in Montreal and Mont Royal. And we had inherited from her grandmother a collection of daguerreotypes of
Oh,
the family.
yes.
And also some clothes, like her grandmother's wedding dress from 1914. So we had these things and we decided, like, what are you gonna do with these, you know? I mean, anyway, we decided what we would do with them is donate them to the Red Path Museum in Montreal.
Mhm.
That museum already had a collection of photographs from of her family,
Oh,
the Scarf family. So we decided to take the daguerreotypes, the wedding dress, children's dress and things to the Red Path Museum. And we got there and donated the photographs, and they were glad to have them. They're really nice photographs. They were interesting
Mhm.
photographs. And we presented them with the wedding dress and the child's dress. The child's dress was Granny Elsa's dress when she was about 6, I think, which would have made it about 1894.
okay.
And they looked at these dresses and they said, well, thank you very much, but we really have so many wedding dresses,
Yeah.
we do not want this. But the little girl's dress from 1894, they couldn't get enough of it. They loved it. Because so few of children's dresses from that period had survived. I mean, girls wore them and they got used for other things and they just weren't available.
Yeah, I know
So we
that.
found it quite interesting that the children's dress was needed, but
Yeah.
not the wedding.
No, that's in my experience in museums, very typical. I mean, everybody has a wedding dress because they're saved. They save them. But what the museums look for are things like underwear and
Yeah.
swimsuits and the stuff that just doesn't make it. And children's clothes, of course, socks. Maybe not socks, but you know, that's the experience. Yeah. I'm glad they took that. Yes.
You had 2 photographs with the ladies, you both had the chair tilted backwards.
Yeah.
Was it just a coincidence you have those?
Chair tilted backwards.
Like you're standing and they're standing in the chair.
Oh,
And you got 2 photographs.
okay. Oh, I know there's one of them. You just pointed something out to me that I didn't notice. There's one. And there was another one? Was it before? Oh my goodness, yes. Wow.
And 2 different chairs, like 2 different.
Well, what's up with that?
They
Just
had,
fun
with
curiosity.
all those photographs, they had to stand very still for a long time.
Right. That's,
And
yes.
maybe if they had their, I
But
don't know,
it
maybe they wanted that pose. And that was the right height for the pose,
I don't know.
yeah.
You-
So I'm curious, yeah.
You folks are great. You're asking me questions I've never been asked before. Looking quite close together. I mean, this would be around, I don't know, even the next one's around 1901, 1902, so
Are they the same studio?
I don't think so. That's Whiten.
You have to sit still for a long period of time.
Whiten.
So that could explain why the children may not be in the photograph.
Or else they're being held, or they have to put their hands on something. That I just know that because we had an old photograph taken of our family. Do you remember? There was somebody who used to come to a mall and they had an assortment of historical recreation and clothing. That's not,
Oh, okay.
and then you know,
Yeah.
they posed, but you had to stay still. And I know I had my 3 little boys and trying to get them to stay still long enough. They had to start over a few times. And,
I'm thinking bribery would have been the
and the
best way to
little
do it.
one, you know, the face was a bit out of focus because he kept,
Right.
are we, yeah,
So that's probably explains why there's not a little one in the picture.
yeah, okay. I was wondering, in your last, I mean, it's
Sure.
not that important. In the last picture you showed me, you said that you had to identify the family.
Right.
There was a child in white and then an older child. And one of the children, one was identified as EM. Could that one in white, could that one have been a boy, about 6 or 7?
Yeah, it's possible.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Did I say daughter? I did say daughter. I'll change my script for next time. Thank you. No, really, I mean, thank you. I like
As
that.
far as trying to identify the family.
Yeah. Well-
If you were thinking
Mm.
daughters. And there wasn't a family that had 2 daughters at that time.
I mean, I'd like to think that if something with a daughter and a son had showed up, I might have thought, huh, but
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Who knows how tired I was that day? I don't know. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, could very well be a boy.
You again, you mentioned the different backdrops and.
Oh,
photos were 3
sure.
things, and I just wanted to note that again.
Yeah, I'll bring them up. I mean, generally, they started playing, got complicated and ended playing, but that's very simplistic. Yeah, this one. So, 1860s, you start off with something pretty plain, like you have a cloth or a wall or maybe a pillar, not a lot in the photo besides the person. And people start adding things like to the backdrop first, like painting on it, outdoor scenes, bringing in a fence or something a little later on. And then you move on towards getting more and more stuff. I mean, you could have a room. Well, this lady here looks like she's in a room here. The backdrop itself is less important, but the props are more important later on. So it's, I guess, is there a simple way to say that? Starts plain, more elaborate, you know, towards 1900, and then it gets plainer again after that.
You know what props in there, would it have had anything to do with what their career or lifestyle was at the time?
Yeah, you could pick, yeah, they would have. I don't think I have any examples here. I just trying to think.
And my other question, was there any significance to who is seated and who is standing?
That's a good question.
Because in some photos you see the gentleman is seated.
Yeah,
And the lady is either somewhat behind him or leaning on the chair.
yes.
But yet I've seen others where the lady is seated and the gentleman is standing, and I just wondered if there was anything, you know, social at that time that related to that.
That's a great question. I'm gonna be looking at all of these just to see if I can find what happened?
I know,
Ah.
I have 2 photos of my great-great-grandparents in 1876. Both sets were married the same year. One in Germany, one in Scotland. In Germany, my grandfather seated and great-great, and the woman is standing, and then the one that was done in Scotland is the reverse. The man is standing and the woman is seated, so I don't know, culturally, maybe?
I
That's what I wondered.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't noticed it.
Props, popular in a certain period of time.
Just a sec. Yeah, I really can't see a definite trend here, and I haven't heard of one. So again, a question of yours I can't answer. That's fine. This is helping me learn, right? Helping all of us learn. You were saying bicycles?
Yeah.
I've seen a few.
There's no certain period of time when they're popular or. You know.
Not that I can think of. There might be. I don't know. I mean, I have a picture of me with my bike in the 1980s too, so. Yeah, that's a good question though. I mean, because again, I mean, I'm thinking about women and how liberating the bicycle was for them. And how they even had the skirt, you know, the bicycle skirt became popular when they started riding the bicycles more and more often. I know they're all over the Aiton's 1901, you know, that historical catalog. So I don't know if I don't know if a study's been done on how popular, when those were popular, but seems to me the ones I've seen are all around 1901, 1905, 1910, that time frame, but I don't know. I haven't done a study on it. That's a good question. Yes.
When you watch TV and movies, do you judge by what people are?
Don't ever watch TV or movies with me. I'm terrible. I'm really awful.
If movies come out. and
Yeah.
people are saying, oh, that's the wrong military uniform for that period or the.
Right.
Wrong,
Or that teacup that will get on.
yeah, you think. I said, people who look at everything.
Well, I mean, I don't notice everything. And if I'm enjoying a movie, it doesn't matter. But the 1970s drive me nuts because they'll be making a historical movie and just gobs of blush, and it just makes me crazy. But yeah, I've had people not want to watch historical movies with me, but I've learned to restrain myself.
Cause I remember watching the Titanic
Mm-hmm.
and they had this car
Mm-hmm.
and you knew, you see things that most people don't
Mm-hmm.
see because you have lived with it or dealt with it.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
Most people don't look, they see a movie, they don't see nothing.
Yeah.
But some people who
They
are
don't see.
knowledgeable.
they're getting better at it all the time though. I mean, because people who are as obsessed as apparently you and I are working on these films now, and they're doing much better. They're doing much better. Yeah. And people are, I mean, because of the internet, people can complain more and more visibly about, you know, errors and things in costumes. So I mean, the movie makers know we're watching.
Well, I remember one example, I think it's Star Wars, and they were doing the movie and then they showed. It
A
showed
person's
the
watch.
actor with his watch like that, and they said that wasn't in the.
Well, if it's Star Wars, maybe he liked antiques from Earth in, we can extrapolate, maybe? No,
They
no.
changed the story,
Yeah, change the story to make it work.
yes.
We can do that. Is there anything else? I just see some really good fudge over there.
Before I ever went to school, they used to come around and take pictures of children.
Right?
What year would that be? Well.
Probably back when I was about 4 or 5.
Like a traveling photographer who, yep.
I remember that happening to me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
We lived in St. John in, kind of army barracks just after the war. I was probably, I think maybe 5, which would make it 48. And a photographer came by all of these H huts where all of these
Yeah,
vets and their families lived and offered to take pictures of people's
Yep.
kids.
Yep.
And I remember my mother taking me in, I had a snowsuit on, I think at the time. And it was pulled sort of down to my waist, so you could take the top part of me. I can remember it happening.
it happened to my daughter in Peterborough. Somebody came to the house and offered to take pictures. And I was just shocked because I didn't think this had happened for a very long time, but
Yeah.
apparently it was still happening in Peterborough, Ontario in 2005.
I mean, they take photos for.
Sorry? Oh, for me, I'd buy them. Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
I got a picture of my brother and I
Mm-hmm.
on the wall.
Nice.
Yeah.
My aunt kept the practice of, she had 6 boys, no girls,
Mm-hmm.
but she kept her boys in dresses when they went to school.
Yeah,
And this was the 50s,
yeah,
40s and the 50s, and she was still.
yeah.
And you got a picture.
She held-
Cousin, they all dress.
She held on to the dress as
Long
long as she
hair.
could. Yeah.
all look like little girls. Well, to us, we look at the picture and make fun of them,
Mm.
but she was determined. It was the last age of the Victorian days.
Right, right. Well, my dad was in short pants for an awful long time.
Lasted a long time.
Yeah, it did.
The
But the
boys
dress-
being dressed like girls.
Pardon me? Did last a long time?
Boys being dressed like girls, that lasted a really long time.
I guess it depends on, I mean, long time.
Like.
I'm thinking back to the dawn of time, but yeah. Did it last until
Mid-50s.
dresses?
It would have been the exception,
I mean, for, you still,
very exception.
Mhm.
you still see, I mean, you still see a holdover of it in baptisms and things, of course.
Sure.
Yeah,
It's
like,
Very exception.
some of my husband's like baby pictures, that I looks dressed like a girl.
For babies, that's one
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
but for, went to short pants, yeah, I can remember
Yeah.
that.
But my aunt was
Dresses?
exceptional. She
You like the
still had
dresses,
on period.
right?
That's later.
Well, I
But
mean,
we can make fun of them.
but I mean, some people hold on to things longer than other people hold on to things. You know, I like to hold on to things too. I knew a girl when I was in costume studies, she dressed like it was 1920. She just, not that she was actually had anything from 1920, she recreated things, but she liked that style, so she just kept on wearing it. Which makes me wonder, I mean, because right now, anything seems to go. You could walk down the street and anything. What are future people going to be thinking of when they look at pictures from this time period? They're going to go, I don't know. This could be anything. Unless they see something with AI and it's a I love New York shirt and it's out of place, but
I
yeah,
was going to say, you should be in the schools,
I should be in the schools.
in the high schools.
I've heard rumors. I have niece.
Evelyn and Zoomland have had some questions in chat for about an hour, sorry. It was hard to interrupt the nice discussion in person, and sorry I couldn't be there in person. And Heather, yeah, we've met before at King's Landing and we were discussing costumes and corsets, so.
Praise you. Tell me I was wrong about everything.
No, we weren't going quite in that depth. And I do have a couple of questions, but looking at the time, you don't have to answer them, but I will read them.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't see your chat. It's not showing up on my screen here, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's really hard to interrupt when you're in Zoom land and there's online live discussion, but my question, and maybe it's already been answered by now, is were laborers such as domestic farmers and factory workers ever photographed, and did they follow these guidelines? And also my second comment, you mentioned you were working on the Ganong collection at UNB, probably the New Brunswick Ganongs, but at King's Landing, we donated a huge collection of archival material to the Provincial Archives for the William and Mary Ganong of Digby, and they transferred it to the Admiral Museum at Digby. So if you're looking for comparisons or cross references, you'll find a lot of Ganong material there. So
what were the dates on that Ganong material?
1800s to probably 40s, maybe as late as 50s. A lot, and there's cross references because of the Merritt connection from St. John. A lot of New Brunswick connections in that collection, and it was quite extensive. Yep. So just wanted to give you the heads up.
Thanks for that. There's probably a lot of crossover there. That's the Admiral Digby Museum?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for jumping in. I appreciate that.
That's okay. That was just waiting for a good moment. It was hard.
That was a great moment. Your first question about the general, farm laborers and whatnot. I mean, I've seen a few, but that's not what you see most of when you see photos in archival collections. It seems to me anyway. So the short answer is yes, but not as often for probably the reasons we were talking about a few minutes ago about expense. Yeah. That's my best guess, but ask Josh. I don't know everything. Ask Josh.
Yeah, poor Josh. we ask him a lot on my end.
History of photography, but I'm learning real fast.
And thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Evelyn. We'll see you sometime.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, good.
Are there any other at distance questions?
Maybe if I stop the share, I'll be able to find out.
She's the only audience we had at distance, so.
Okay.
Okay.
I think maybe more informally, we can continue with questions and some sweets and coffee. And thanks, Phil, for bringing, and thanks seats today. And please enjoy and have a one-on-one meeting with Heather.
Thanks for that, and thanks for letting me come, and thanks for letting me go on and on about things at a ramble.